Rules Committee will come to order, and thank you very much for joining us today. Today, the Rules Committee will consider H.R. 3009, Enforce the Law for Sanctuary Cities Act of 2015. I believe the American people are frustrated with government officials who choose not to enforce immigration laws. That is primarily done out of Washington, D.C. It's being done by the executive branch of government against the laws of this country. From the President of the United States to mayors and cities across our country, elected officials are actively choosing to follow immigration laws, and the American people are left to shoulder the burden. Policies like executive amnesty in sanctuary cities encourage illegal immigration, crime, and intolerance of the law, and I believe that must end. H.R. 3009 would cut off specific federal grants for sanctuary cities that defy federal immigration law. The bill is based upon simple ideas. Cities should not expect to receive related federal grants if they choose to ignore federal immigration law. Passage of this bill would encourage cities to communicate an individual's immigration status to federal officials so they can know who's in country illegally and can act on information appropriately. People who commit crimes are those who we are talking about, people who would be arrested and incarcerated, not people who we run across just simply on regular routine matters. This is an important step, I believe, towards ending sanctuary policies that undermine the rule of law of the United States of America. I believe if our nation fails to enforce the laws of our border, we will fail to cease to be a nation of sovereignty. I believe any nation should have the right and the responsibility to enforce its laws, and the people should expect that those laws will be followed. I want to thank the gentleman from San Diego, Duncan Hunter, who's the author of this bill, as well as the young chairman from Virginia, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, my dear friend Bob Goodlatte. Also joining us is my dear friend Zoe Lofgren, who she works together on me another important caucus that deals with important issues of security. I also want to recognize that Congressman Luis Gutierrez, my good friend from Chicago, will be here today. Before we defer to our witnesses today, I'd like to defer to the gentleman from Massachusetts for a statement that he would choose to make. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me begin by saying that I'm upset that once again that we are here in the Rules Committee considering a bill that has never come before the Judiciary Committee, never had a hearing, never had a markup, and never been debated by the committee about whether it improves or undermines the ability of local law enforcement to protect their communities. Like all my House colleagues, and like all Americans, native-born and immigrant alike, my heart goes out to the family of Catherine Steinle. Anytime we lose an innocent victim to an act of violence, it is a terrible tragedy, and we all have to ask ourselves whether anything could have been done to prevent such a tragedy. But H.R. 3009 will not make our communities safer. In fact, it will do the opposite. That's why it is opposed by the Major Cities Chiefs Association, the National Criminal Justice Association, the Fraternal Order of Police, the Major County Sheriffs Association, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities, the National Network to End Domestic Violence, and scores of religious, human rights, civil rights, and law enforcement organizations. I think we should listen to them. I think we should also we should help our various federal, state, and local agencies better communicate and improve protocols regarding the release of federal prisoners when ICE has filed a detainer request. I do not think we should punish and strip grants and federal funding from local law enforcement, cities and towns who are promoting community policing, public safety, and the U.S. Constitution ahead of racial profiling and prejudice. This bill is all about prejudice. Prejudice against so-called sanctuary cities, prejudice against due process guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution, prejudice against immigrants, and prejudice against community-based policing. Mr. Chairman, this is yet another wedge issue, and my friends on the other side of the aisle have never seen a wedge issue that they don't want to embrace. But what's frustrating is that we need to address some of the shortfalls in our immigration laws. We need to pass comprehensive immigration reform, and yet here we are not doing that, not fixing things in a way that better serves our country and our citizens, but we're going down this road. So I regret very much that we're doing this, and I would urge my colleagues, when it comes up for a vote, to vote no. And with that, I yield back my time.
Thank the gentleman for his opening statement, and I want to welcome both of our witnesses today. Both witnesses that we have today are experienced and seasoned veterans, not only of their committees, but also of the Rules Committee. You understand that you are here to represent not only your ideas, I know the ideas of your party, but in particular, the ideas that you believe are correct and probable from your perspective. We respect, at the Rules Committee, both of you. We're delighted that you're here. If you'll please remember that anything you have in writing that will help our awesome stenographer, if you'll please leave that behind as she tries to decipher, as she does every day, Texan, as I speak, but she does a great job. But I just want to make sure we leave that. Also, that you've got that green light on. And so if you want anything, any water, if you'll just let me know. We did not believe you wanted any, but if you do, please let me know. The young chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Chairman Goodlatte's recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's always an honor to testify here, and it's always an honor when you call me the young chairman. I support H.R. 3009 for the Enforce the Law for Sanctuary Cities Act and commend Representative Hunter for introducing this legislation. It helps to address one of the main factors contributing to the collapse of immigration enforcement in the United States: sanctuary cities that prohibit their law enforcement officers from sharing information with federal immigration authorities to enable the removal of unlawful and criminal aliens. Nearly 20 years ago, Congress realized that sanctuary cities were impeding the federal government from enforcing our immigration laws and jeopardizing the safety of their residents, immigrant and native-born alike. Legislation co-written by former Chairman of the Judiciary Committee Lamar Smith prohibited states and localities from becoming sanctuaries for unlawful aliens. The Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996 ensures that jurisdictions cannot prohibit or restrict government officials from sending to or receiving from federal immigration authorities information regarding the immigration status of any person. Unfortunately, despite the proliferation of sanctuary jurisdictions, the Justice Department has never initiated a prosecution for violation of the 1996 Act. If the administration won't act, Congress must. And that is what Mr. Hunter's bill does. It withholds key federal law enforcement grants from sanctuary jurisdictions that violate the 1996 Act. Enactment of Representative Hunter's legislation will help persuade sanctuary jurisdictions to simply abide by current federal law and in so doing advance public safety. Representative Hunter's bill is an important first step, but there is much more we need to do to rebuild immigration enforcement in the United States. Once jurisdictions notify DHS of arrested unlawful and criminal aliens, it is crucial that they hold these aliens for transfer so that DHS can launch removal proceedings. The Center for Immigration Studies has revealed that in the first 8 months of 2014, sanctuary cities refused to comply with DHS detainers for 8,145 aliens. After releasing these aliens in only an 8-month period, 1,867 were arrested again for criminal offenses. Most recently, San Francisco's refusal to honor a DHS detainer resulted in the tragic death of Catherine Steinle. This is why it is so important that jurisdictions honor DHS detainers. We need to make crystal clear that detainers are mandatory, yet this administration openly proclaims that detainers can be ignored and has chosen to dramatically scale back their issuance. This administration has chosen to create enforcement-free zones for millions of unlawful and criminal aliens. It has turned the U.S. into a sanctuary nation. That is the current reality. Despite DHS's pledge to prioritize the removal of serious criminal aliens, in the last year, the number of administrative arrests of criminal aliens has fallen by a third. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement continues to release thousands of criminal aliens onto our streets themselves, 30,558 in 2014, of which 1,423 have already been convicted of new crimes. There are almost 180,000 convicted criminal aliens currently in removal proceedings living in our neighborhoods, and almost 170,000 convicted criminal aliens who have been ordered removed who are also living free in the United States. Under the Obama administration, the total number of such convicted criminal aliens who are not being detained or deported has jumped 28% since 2012. We must prevent this or any other administration from being able to turn off the switch on immigration enforcement. Representative Gowdy, chairman of the Immigration and Border Security Subcommittee, has offered us a way forward to ensure enforcement of our immigration laws despite the purposeful inaction of any administration. His legislation, the Michael Davis Jr. and Danny Oliver in Honor of State and Local Law Enforcement Act, allows states and localities to enact and enforce immigration laws of their own as long as they are consistent with federal law. Jurisdictions could proactively take responsibility for protecting their communities and ensuring the integrity of our immigration system. Today, we are making an important down payment on protecting our constituents, and I thank you for the opportunity to testify on this legislation.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Ms. Lofgren, welcome. Delighted that you're with us today.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Let me just say at the outset that I'm disappointed that we are considering this bill for a vote in the House tomorrow when it has not been the subject of the committee process. We're having a subcommittee hearing on the general subject matter of so-called sanctuary cities tomorrow, but this bill has not been a product of the committee process, and I think it should have been. That was the pledge that we got from the Speaker when he became the Speaker. We'd have regular order, and I think if we had had that, we would have had a better process, because although I don't think there's any disagreement in this House, I certainly have not heard it, of the tragedy that occurred in San Francisco. Kate Steinle was innocently walking with her father and was shot and killed, murdered. And that's an outrage. I mean, it's terrible. Unfortunately, H.R. 3009, if enacted, would not have prevented that from happening. It does nothing about notification of dangerous inmates to ICE. As I know the committee is aware, there are court cases suggesting that it is unconstitutional for a criminal jurisdiction to hold an inmate on a civil detainer. And whereas we might not like that, we all, at the beginning of this Congress, we read the Constitution aloud. We have to abide by that. Now, certainly, the administration is pursuing with all of the localities what they call their priority enforcement program, which asks for notification when high priority individuals have served their sentence. But this bill does nothing about that, does nothing at all about that. So I think it's a mistake to take this bill up when it really does not deal with the issue that is so much in the minds of the American public. And I think it's worth pointing out that there is substantial opposition to the actual bill, and here's the reason why. It interferes with the judgment of local police agencies on how to do local policing. And that's why so many police agencies have come out against it. We have one of the witnesses at the subcommittee hearing tomorrow is from Dayton, Ohio. Now, in Dayton, Ohio, police officers are instructed not to check the immigration status of witnesses and victims and not to ask about legal status during minor traffic stops. Their chief of police is going to appear at the subcommittee tomorrow, but this is what he said last year, quote, "These policies allow us to focus our limited resources on our primary mission, crime solving and community safety. They also send the message that victims of violent crime, human trafficking, and other crimes should never be afraid to reach out for help due to fear of the immigration consequences." Now, according to Chief Beal, in the 3 years after they adopted these policies, Serious crime in Dayton dropped 22%, and serious property crime decreased almost 15%. So obviously, what they did was working. And it would be a mistake, I think, to take a jurisdiction like that and take away their COPS money, their burn grant money. That's just not the role that the Congress should play in my judgment. I'd like to mention something else that this bill overlooks. Yesterday, Leader Pelosi and I sent a letter to the Secretary of Homeland Security and to the Attorney General, asking a series of questions, but basically asking that we conduct a review of the policies that allow for an individual in Bureau of Prison Custody to be transmitted to another jurisdiction. In the case of the murder in San Francisco, the alleged murderer had been convicted of felony reentry after removal. In fact, he was convicted, as I understand it, 3 times for felony entry after removal. In fact, he spent the last 16 years of 20 in prison for that very offense. He'd served over 4 years. They were ready to deport him. But there was an outstanding warrant in San Francisco from 1995 for failure to appear on a marijuana possession matter. For reasons that I don't understand, he was sent to San Francisco, but the district attorney quite obviously decided not to prosecute. Why? How would you find a witness to that crime 20 years later? There's no victim to testify. And further, in California today, possession of marijuana is an infraction, not a misdemeanor. So, the question I think we need to ask is, why would we send someone who should be deported to a jurisdiction for a warrant that's 20 years old that's not going to lead to a prosecution? Now, obviously, it would be a different result if you had a real victim, if you had a real crime, you really intended to prosecute. But we need to examine these procedures and make sure that what we're doing is actually targeted to make our communities safer. Unfortunately, the bill we're considering tomorrow does not accomplish that. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't end by saying how disappointed I am that we missed an opportunity to achieve comprehensive immigration reform in the last Congress. We had a bill, S-744, that passed the Senate by a bipartisan margin. The Congressional Budget Office said that it would decrease the federal budget deficit by $158 billion in the first 10 years and by $685 billion over the next 10 years. We know that we had the votes here in the House because we did a count on the Democratic side and also on the Republican side, but we never got a vote. And I think if we had adopted comprehensive immigration reform, we'd be a long ways down the road of solving some of these problems that are so troubling to Americans and to all members of the House. And with that, I thank the committee for allowing me to testify.
Yes, ma'am, and thank you very much. Ms. Loughran, you referred at some point to the Constitution. Could you go back to your statement, or do you remember?
Yes.
I don't. I remember what that is.
Well, there have been a series of cases. The most prominent one was Oberfell versus Hodges that was decided in June of this year, but there are several other courts that have made the determination that holding an inmate in a criminal facility, a state or local facility, at the request of ICE is unconstitutional, violates the Fourth Amendment. Why would that be? The ICE detainer is a civil matter because immigration deportation is a civil matter. And so it violates the Fourth Amendment requirement for a warrant to simply hold them at the request of ICE. You would need a warrant, or, the request for notification does not fall afoul of that because it doesn't require further detention of the individual. But to merely say, hold this person till we come, courts have found that that violates the Fourth Amendment. And I know that we would all take that seriously because we all honor our Constitution.
Do you consider yourself to understand what the policy is in San Francisco?
I do not consider myself an expert on San Francisco.
Do you consider that you are aware of and knowledgeable of that?
Only what I've read in the paper. I'll tell you that I am more familiar with the state of California has something called the Trust Act that basically says that for serious felony matters, we should cooperate with ICE.
And so is there a difference between a serious felony and an unserious felony?
The distinction is made even in the removal proceedings. For example, if you hadn't, I recently was down meeting with Central American mothers and their children who had entered the United States seeking asylum. They filed
Illegally.
for asylum. Yes, although it is provided for in immigration law that if you are fleeing violence, you may seek asylum, and that's provided for in immigration law. If your only offense is related to a violation of immigration law itself, some believe, and actually Priority 1 references that that is a different category of offense than, a violent offense or a violation of the criminal law. I do think that, and I've asked my staff to research it, the individual, and I don't want to use his name because I don't want to give him any more publicity. I don't think he deserves any publicity.
Is it Donald Trump?
It's not Donald
Oh,
Trump. But
Is it Donald Trump?
the individual who's being held in San Francisco was removable. He fell within the Priority 1 removal category. He had committed an aggravated felony, and he should have been deported.
Mr. Chairman, in Irving, Texas, which is what I represented until a few years ago, we dealt with 287G, I believe is a program. And the police on routine matters just do not have the time or the interest on checking the things perhaps that have been discussed here today. However, if they determine that they would be arresting a person for a violation of the law that they were felt like was a city or state law, then they would bring that person in, then there would be an evaluation that is done. Is that program still in place?
That program was substituted by the program that Ms. Lofgren referred to earlier. That also was the program that was subject to a Supreme Court decision in Arizona, which the court clearly said that Arizona had the right to help the federal government enforce immigration laws, but at the discretion of the federal government. The next day, the Obama administration kicked Arizona out of that program. There has not been support by the administration for this. One thing that Ms. Lofgren has said—
So the funding for that was stopped by the Department of Justice or Homeland Security?
Well, in that case, Trey Gowdy's legislation, which has passed out of the Judiciary Committee, which I hope we will bring forward to your committee
Did
soon.
the federal government arbitrarily, because they disagreed, did they stop funding
They stopped.
the state of Arizona?
How funding works is different than the program itself. They simply determined that Arizona could no longer participate in the program.
Well, there's money
If I
that's
may-
attached to it.
If I may, on that
Yes, ma'am.
point, the major jurisdiction that participated in the 287G program was the jurisdiction of Joe Arpaio. They had a number of problems with Sheriff Arpaio, and as you know, he was found guilty of violating various court orders, violating the civil rights of individuals who he racially profiled, and they finally just terminated that contract because it was problematic. There were problems throughout the United States of jurisdictions that were racially profiling using the 287G program. It was not a program that was yielding good results in the judgment of the department, and I actually think their judgment was sound in this matter. I do think that their priority enforcement program that targets felons instead of day-to-day people is a wise approach and something I very much support that the administration is doing.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, the gentlewoman from California, I think correctly points out that the U.S. government was also at fault in this case with regard to the Bureau of Prisons turning Mr. Sanchez over to the city of San Francisco rather than over to ICE for deportation purposes. I don't disagree with her on that. I think both the United States government and the city of San Francisco are at fault in allowing the circumstances to arise in which the unfortunate tragedy occurred. And San Francisco has a policy that specifically prohibits their law enforcement from cooperating with immigration. They shouldn't make that decision. I don't always agree with the decisions made by ICE. As I noted in my testimony, they've released 30,000 plus criminal illegal aliens back onto our streets last year. So the fault does not just lie with sanctuary cities. More needs to be done. But sanctuary cities released 8,000 criminals onto our streets last year, and already the recidivism rate is close to 25%. As time elapses, it will be a higher number. Now, with regard to the point that Ms. Lofgren made about the ability of localities or even ICE to detain people, the Supreme Court has actually spoken on this subject, and they've spoken favorably in terms of the right to detain. The Supreme Court in 2003 in DeMoore versus Kim upheld a federal statute that requires the detention of aliens who are removable from the U.S. based on having committed certain enumerated crimes. The detained alien argued that the government may not, consistent with the due process clause of the Fifth Amendment, detain him for the brief period necessary for his removal proceedings. The court upheld the statute, and the court found that this court has firmly and repeatedly endorsed the proposition that Congress may make rules as to aliens that would be unacceptable if applied to citizens, because of the fact they are not supposed to be in the United States in the first place if they're unlawfully present, and that's particularly true when they commit crimes. But instead of doing something about it, this administration now has allowed 350,000 convicted criminal aliens to be on our streets. 180,000 of them are currently under deportation proceedings to deport from the country, and instead of detaining them, they have released them onto our streets, and another 170,000 have already been ordered deported, and they are out on our streets and have not been picked up to be deported. So this is not an isolated incident, unfortunately, with regard to the tragedy in San Francisco, and there are many, many, many crimes that are the result of both the federal government not enforcing the law and sanctuary cities not cooperating in the enforcement of the law. And that's why we think this is a good first step to make sure that precious federal dollars that go to help law enforcement agencies go to agencies that are cooperating in the enforcement of the law and not those who are not. We have limited tools to secure cooperation, and I think it's important that the Congress use this tool.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms.
first,
Lofgren?
if I may, I take issue with the numbers that the chairman has thrown out as to criminal aliens and the like. This is probably not the forum to go through that, nor if we're going to adhere to the 5-minute rule, is there time to do so. I would simply point out that the case cited by the chairman relates to an individual who's being held in federal custody and who could be further held for deportation. That is a very different matter than the courts have found in the case I cited to you, where the request was for a state or local jurisdiction to hold someone at the request of the federal government as a civil detainer.
Ms. Lofgren, has the city of San Francisco offered any evaluation or reevaluation of their policy as a result of this stunning murder?
I don't, as I say, I'm not an expert
Yes,
on
ma'am.
San Francisco, but it's my understanding from reading the San Francisco Chronicle that they are evaluating their situation vis-a-vis the notification issue.
Well, I hope that this is strong notice to the cities of San Francisco and others who harbor these criminals that we're reevaluating that also, and that's what we're doing here today. Dr. Burgess?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for bringing the bill, and thanks to our witnesses for being here and presenting such succinct summaries of what the issues are at hand. Mr. Chairman, I agree with you in your opening remarks. I believe that the United States does have a sovereign right and duty to define and defend its borders, and I frankly do not understand why we are not doing that at the present time. Yeah, it's better if things come through regular order, and it's great to have hearings, and I'm on an authorizing committee, and we love to have hearings about all kinds of things, and we do, but there are some times when the circumstances dictate that we move with more dispatch. Mr. Chairman, for that, I am grateful that you moved with that dispatch and brought this bill to the Rules Committee so that the House will have the opportunity to work its will on the bill as presented. In some ways, I don't know that we've gone far enough, but again, I appreciate that the chairman has brought the bill to the committee and allowed us to move forward. To the extent that there is discrepancies with the numbers, if the witnesses will provide the Rules Committee those numbers, certainly in the days and weeks ahead, we may have more chance to evaluate what those numbers actually mean. But there's one number I can't get out of my head, and that's one murder too many, and should not have happened. And if there's anything this committee can do to prevent that from happening again this weekend, I think we should. And even if it's just calling attention to the problem at hand. So, again, thanks to the witness for being here and presenting the information as they did. Mr. Chairman, thanks for moving with such dispatch. I think in this case it is important that we move, and I hope the other body is paying attention, and I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Gentlewoman from New York's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think all murders are one murder too many. I want to join Ms. Loughran. I regret that there was not a committee hearing on this. We might have heard from the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities, all police agencies that I know of in the United States, as to whether or not that this murder would cause us to punish numbers of cities in the United States for things they haven't done by taking away their federal money. Does anybody have any idea where Mr. Sanchez got the gun?
Yes, I do.
Where did he get it?
Gentlewoman want to answer that question?
Apparently, a park policeman,
BLM.
Bureau of Land Management, his car was broken into and his gun was stolen, which he reported, and it was that weapon that was used. How the accused found it is yet to be determined.
They don't think that he's the one who broke in the car. Is that,
We-
the reason I
There's
asked
no
that,
conclusion on that.
no, the reason I ask that is that almost every week here, we stand in a moment of silence on the floor of the House of Representatives, and we mourn a tragedy like the thing happened in San Francisco. It is awful. A wonderful young woman, a citizen, doing nothing in the world to harm anybody, was killed. That is also true of what happened in South Carolina. It's also true of what happened in Chattanooga. It's also true of what happened in Aurora, Colorado, and Columbine, Colorado, Newtown, Connecticut. I mean, it just goes on and on. And I must say that particularly the fact that the gun never seems to be to blame for anything, that I wonder if the American public would prefer that we all stand once a week here for a moment of silence and read names, or would they like it if we would do something about the ability for everybody to get guns? I think there are 330 million people who are citizens of the United States, and something like 320 million guns. That really is something I think we ought to have a committee hearing on. I'd appreciate that very much. But I think that taking this precipitous action of cutting off federal money to all those cities is something that could have at least required a committee hearing. Thank you.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. The gentleman from Alabama seeks time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm the father of 2 grown women, but I never quit being their daddy. And I cannot imagine what Mr. Steinle went through that day when he was with his daughter and she was shot and died in his arms. He testified yesterday before the Senate. Very emotional, powerful testimony. And I wonder what he would say if he were in this room today with us. Because I think what he was telling the Senate yesterday is that he wanted us to do something. There's been a failure here. And in part, it's our failure. And I don't think it's too much for any of us to understand the human component of that father. And this is not an isolated incident, unfortunately. If it's not an isolated incident, it's going to happen again until somebody stops it. And it seems to me it's the responsibility of those of us in public office to stop it. And here is an opportunity to stop it. And I would not be doing my duty as a congressman. I also wouldn't be doing my duty as a dad if I didn't stop it. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, Congress has become a very cynical place. You know, I'm amused as I was listening to my colleague from Texas try to justify why we are not following regular order, why we're bringing a bill to the House floor where there were no hearings, no markups, no nothing. And, you know, if we were a more serious place, you know, we would try to do something meaningful, and I think you would get to doing something meaningful, something that made a difference through deliberation. Because as I look at this bill, there's nothing in here that would have prevented this terrible tragedy. I mean, this is, I mean, I guess this is a, as I said at the beginning, this sounds like my friends are trying to find a wedge issue, you know, and run with it. And I regret that very much because, you know, we're going to have this debate that will be polarizing, and all kinds of fingers are going to be pointed, and a lot of the fingers that are being pointed at people and agencies that really are not responsible here. But I mean, we have all these local officials, state officials, you know, police associations saying this is a bad thing, but here in Washington, a bunch of politicians sitting around here going, well, we don't care what you think. We think this is the right thing to do. You know, I'm for trying to fix our immigration laws, and we all are. I'm not for doing something just to say we're doing something if it doesn't mean anything, and if in fact it might do more harm. I don't understand. I just think this is a bad idea, and you know, and as I said at the beginning, I think that this is more about prejudice and about demonizing immigrants than it is about trying to solve a problem. And I'd like to think we're better than that, and I think that we should take a step back and let the committees of jurisdiction do its job. You know, I mean, I don't understand why waiting a few days to listen to people who know more than we do about what the realities are on the ground, give their thoughts, our police officers, our sheriff's associations, why that's such a bad idea. Yet we're not going to do it. We're going to rush a bill to the floor tomorrow and say we're doing something when we're not doing anything. And again, I regret very much that we're doing this, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Does any other member of the Republican side seek time? Seeing none. Does Judge Hastings seek time? The gentleman's recognized.
And I'd like to ask Mr. Goodlatte, following on what Mr. McGovern just said, is there anything in the measure offered by Mr. Hunter and others that would have prevented the tragedy that occurred in San Francisco?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Hastings. The fact of the matter is, there is already in both federal law and in San Francisco law the tools necessary to have prevented this tragedy from happening. And had they acted properly, it would have been prevented. But the fact is that San Francisco has taken a public official policy of instructing its law enforcement to not cooperate with federal law enforcement. And under those circumstances, many of us question whether or not the federal government should be providing funding, which could be used for very valuable purposes. But if one of those purposes is not to cooperate with the federal government in terms of getting people like Mr. Sanchez off the streets and out of the country, then we think that those funds should be held back until they do comply. Okay. But in terms of would this stop it? Only if San Francisco and other sanctuary cities change their policies, then that would stop it.
Well, then my follow-on question is, what in 3009 would have prevented the sequence of events in the months leading up to this tragedy, and what would have encouraged or required the San Francisco Sheriff's Department to certify that the District Attorney's Office would in fact prosecute Lopez Sanchez before taking custody of him from the Bureau of Prisons? And what would have required the Bureau of Prisons and Immigrations and Customs Enforcement to consult with both the Sheriff's Department and the District Attorney? Point me to where that is in 3009 that would have made those changes.
Mr. Hastings, I don't need to point you to that in this legislation because it already exists in federal law.
I see, then why are we doing 3009?
Because the city of San Francisco is not complying with federal law, is not cooperating with federal law enforcement to keep their citizens and citizens around the country safe. They're joined by 275 other localities who've taken the same position, and this cannot continue because
It's more than 275. It's 320 communities across the country that have adopted these policies.
Even worse.
And they do so, they claim, for the purpose of building trust between the police and the communities they serve to promote public safety and community policing. But I think it's odd. You know, I'm going to get whiplash here with states' right. The Republican Party claims to be the defender of states' right. And here we were yesterday dealing with food safety issues and other issues where you're meddling with local people. And now, another issue we dealt with yesterday, you wanted it to be a federal issue. Now we're back here with a federal issue that the local governments seem to have a different view on many of the local governments. Ms. Loughran, you wanted to respond?
Yes, if you look at the bill on page 2, beginning at line 7, no, line 11.
A political subdivision?
Yes, it refers us to section 642 of the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act of 1986. If you look at that section, it basically talks about the sharing of information regarding the citizenship or immigration status of an individual. It has nothing to do with notification such as was necessary in this case. This bill would not amend the problem that existed. I was earlier asked what San Francisco is doing, and I have a response to that now. Apparently, a San Francisco supervisor is today introducing a package of reforms. One, the legislation would call on the sheriff to rescind his policy barring all communication with ICE. And number 2, tracking the suggestion that Congresswoman Pelosi and I made to the Attorney General and Secretary of Homeland Security, would formally request the city attorney to draft legislation mandating that the sheriff confirm with the district attorney that he will indeed prosecute an outstanding warrant before transporting a prisoner to the jurisdiction, which if it had been in this case, the individual would not have been transferred, in fact, would have been deported.
On yesterday, I made a specific request to learn how many agencies were opposed that I could learn most immediately. So Ms. Joanne Lynn from the American Civil Liberties Union, Washington Legislative Office, responded to my office indicating the following. On behalf of the undersigned 144 national, state, and local advocacy organizations, please find attached a copy below a letter urging representatives to oppose 3009. What it goes on to say is the sweeping language would penalize the exercise of any local police discretion to limit inquiries into immigration status in any manner and would strip funding from localities that undertake the balancing of public safety considerations. I won't take full time. I will ask unanimous consent to place into the record the whole statement that she sent to me of the organizations that oppose this, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Without objection, we'll enter that into the record.
Of course, the AFL-CIO, African American Ministers in Action, Alliance for Citizenship, the Asian Americans Advancing Justice, the Dream Action Coalition, Fair Immigration Reform Movement, Jobs for Justice, the National Alliance of Latin American and Caribbean Communities, La Raza, Labor Organizing Network, Domestic Violence Hotline, Alliance for the Future, and it goes on and on and on of a variety of organizations. Then I want to read into the record on the distinguished Archbishop from San Francisco's statement in response to this legislation. The Archbishop of San Francisco, who's Salvatore Cordileone, said the following: I applaud the commitment to public safety of the city of San Francisco and other local jurisdictions, and support their right to exercise reasonable and appropriate discretion in the handling of immigrant detainees. A just and humanitarian policy should not be abandoned because of flaws in the system. With his statement in the record, then different than what we are doing here in the House with a knee-jerk reaction to a very extraordinary tragedy in our society. And you all seem to be good at that, handling something from an emotional standpoint when things have happened, when in fact you could have been doing a great deal more with reference to substantive immigration that might have caused us to be in a different position. Yesterday, Senator Leahy and Senator Grassley in their Senate Judiciary Committee held hearings. And among the things in those hearings, and I ask unanimous consent to include the full statement of Senator Leahy into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. And then I had an opportunity to review the testimony of Tom Manger, the Chief of Police President of the Major Cities Chiefs Association, on behalf of the Major Cities Chiefs Association before the Judiciary Committee. He opens by thanking Senator Grassley and Senator Leahy, and then he goes on and says, as cops, we see the good and the bad every day. We are witnesses to the immense benefits that immigration brings to our nation, but also see the sinister side. We see firsthand how immigrants become victims of the worst criminals, and also how illegal aliens may become the worst criminals themselves, engaged in drug trafficking, human trafficking, and all manner of crime. The recent tragedy in San Francisco brings us together for a discussion of how immigration enforcement relates to the role of local law enforcement. And we confront this question yet again. What should be the priorities of local police and sheriffs? Our priority is what you would expect. Certainly, what each of you here today seeks from us, the safety of our communities across the nation. Our priority is the prevention of crime and the protection of the public we are sworn to serve. I'm here to share with you the policy adopted by a vote of our membership, the 67 largest cities in America. We hope you will agree that our position represents a reasoned balance between conflicting demands. And he goes on to talk about the limited role of local police and sheriffs. Then he talks about the community trust. Then he talks about legal authority and their view as to what we need. Immigration is a federal responsibility. Immigration issues between the United States government and other countries, not local or state entities and other countries. Any immigration enforcement laws or practices should be nationally based, consistent, and federally funded. He goes on to say, as all of us say often, we must secure the borders. Then he talks about federal agents enforcing laws prohibiting the hiring of undocumented immigrants. And he bottoms out by saying that the committee should expect the police to cooperate and follow established procedure, but you should not expect us to do the job of a federal agency, whether customs, aviation, security, border security, or immigration. And obviously he says he welcomes the dialogue, but he's opposed to that kind of intervention. And I ask that Mr. Manger's statement before the Senate Judiciary Committee on yesterday be made a part of our record.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, there are many other things that I could say, but let me put it to you this way. Congress should pass substantive, comprehensive immigration reform so we can reestablish the rule of law. Democrats and almost all Americans are united in support of that approach, and Republicans have blocked it time and time again. Republicans are demonstrating once again that they really don't have or will not bring up a workable immigration plan except breaking up families, deporting dreamers, deporting parents of U.S. citizens, deporting children fleeing violence and trafficking, or with this bill, threatening to cut local police department budgets if they don't do the federal government's job for them. This bill second guesses police chiefs, sheriffs, and local governments about how best to police their own communities, my good defenders of states' rights. Hear them and hear them loud and clear. I believe, my party believes, that local officials are better judges of what will keep our communities safe than those of us up here in the throes of the whirl of Washington. Just last week, the president of the 330,000-member-strong Fraternal Order of Police wrote a letter to Speaker Boehner stating their strong opposition to this bill and other proposals that would penalize law enforcement agencies by withholding federal funding or resources from law enforcement assistance programs in an effort to enforce or coerce a policy change in so-called sanctuary cities. Most of y'all don't even know what a sanctuary city is, but you make these laws as if you do. By causing immigrants to fear their own deportation or deportation of friends and family if they call the police in an emergency, this bill would be extremely harmful to public safety. We're all safer when everyone, including immigrants, feels comfortable calling the police when they are the victims of crime or have information about a crime. This bill isn't intended to solve any problems. It's only meant to jump on the election season crazy bandwagon of certain individuals whose name won't go mentioned. I started to send Jimmy Fallon something and say Donald Trump said that he didn't go to the military because he had a spur in his foot. Now I wanted Jimmy Fallon to ask him, which one was it? The one that you put in your mouth all the time, or the one that you walk on and say outrageous things about heroes like John McCain? We are demonizing immigrants, perpetuating the myth that immigrants are criminals and threats to the public. Decades and decades of research demonstrate that immigrants are less likely to commit serious crime than native-born persons. I ask you, what does it say about a society or a group of people that would not want people that are raped or harmed to be able to call the police without being deported? I applaud the sanctuary cities. I think this particular legislation is not only misguided, it is just, in fact, nothing but rank politics, and that isn't what's needed. What's needed is immigration reform. I yield back the balance.
Gentleman yields back his time. I'd like to state for the record that this has nothing to do with immigrants. It has everything to do with criminals.
Who are immigrants?
Sir, I'm just telling you, it has everything to do with criminals. We have not talked about the things except where we're dealing with criminals. And
What was Lopez Sanchez?
Gentleman's recognized.
What was Lopez Sanchez? Was he an immigrant, Mr.?
He is a murderer.
Correctly.
He is a murderer.
Immigrant murderer.
He is a murderer.
I understand.
And you and I both know, and I'm not trying to do anything other than just stand up for my party. You're entitled to your opinion.
Mr. Chairman.
You're entitled to your opinion, but I'm also entitled to mine. And all I'm saying is, in my opinion, this is about people who are criminals. And I heard the gentleman's right.
There's one example, and then paint with a broad brush and make everybody, we don't spend any time talking about all the good things that immigrants have done, and you can't bring yourself and your party to hold an immigration hearing. You won't even put the one that was passed in the Senate on the floor. What's wrong with you people? And you're going to tell me that this is a knee-jerk reaction? Call him anything you want to. Call him murderer. That's what he was.
Yes,
he
sir.
killed an innocent woman and had no business doing that. But we shouldn't be making a law that's going to cause local authorities to be up in arms about grants that they need in order to be able to provide the safety for all of us against all criminals, be they immigration or not.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen, seek more time?
No, I don't.
Well, let me just say this. I think even San Francisco realized they had a problem.
Mr. Chairman,
Young chairman is
I
recognized.
would request that the committee make a part of the record a statement from Senator Grassley's office, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, titled 121 Criminals Charged with Murder Following Release from Custody Pending Deportation. That demonstrates that while Kate Steinley's murder was definitely an extraordinary event, there have been 121 other extraordinary events that have occurred in recent times.
And I think that, Mr. Chairman, you're here because you felt like a review was necessary, highlighting public policy. And I've heard the gentlewoman, Ms. Lofgren, say, and San Francisco, I don't know whether she said it because I asked it, but she indicated at some point that she's now received information that they are reviewing that policy. I think that's what is good. And I think that this hearing has had some to do with it. I think the legislation is perhaps spot on, that we're asking cities to please reevaluate and look at what they're doing. But simply to say that they are going to order from a non-police jurisdiction element by politicians to say, don't deal with your fellow colleagues with the federal government, I think that is most unwise, and it looks like they're going to reevaluate that. Does the gentleman from Colorado seek time?
I yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts for a unanimous consent request.
Without objection, the gentleman's recognized.
No, and the chairman may be interested in this too. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to put into the record the article by the Sheriff Valdez of the Sheriff of Dallas County, Texas, who wrote a very powerful piece opposed to this legislation, which I think everybody should take the time to read.
And I'd ask the gentleman to yield.
I yield to the gentleman
Without
from Florida.
objection, we'll enter that into the
The
record.
title of this bill is Immigration to amend Section 241I of the Immigration and Nationality Act. And if we haven't been here talking about immigration, I don't know what the hell we've been here talking about.
Well, and so, Mr. Chairman, when I first got the notice that we'd have a meeting, and I was hoping there would be a response, to the situation, and there's so many bills that we could bring forward that would address the various things that broke in the system. I mean, it's my understanding that this the perpetrator had illegal entry. So, I mean, how many of the 121 criminal aliens that have committed murder have had illegal entry? Obviously, border security is an important part of this. These people shouldn't even be here in the first place. So, I mean, there's so many different breakdowns that we're not addressing. And in fact, this bill before us doesn't even address one. And I'm not an attorney. Ms. Lofgren and Mr. Goodlatte are, so I'm going to ask for their help on this to see if I understand it. Ms. Lofgren, basically what this bill does is it uses the federal funding as the hook, as we do in many areas. That's an appropriate thing. But what you're trying to do in this bill is saying, local jurisdiction, you have to continue to detain a person for 48 hours beyond the time that they would have otherwise been released, which has been found by courts to be illegal. So what are we asking? What is this bill trying to get the local jurisdictions to do that courts have found to be illegal?
If I may, says eliminate the funding for criminal justice funding that we provide unless localities implement Section 642 of the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act of 1986. And that's on page 2 of the bill. That section of the law does not require detainer, does not require notification. It has to do with information sharing regarding the citizenship or immigration status of individuals. And the implication always was, and I was a member of the committee at the time, was to have localities find out whether the people they were arresting and booking were undocumented or not. That's why so many of the localities are objecting, because, especially in urban areas, police chiefs have found that if you ask every person that you run into their citizenship status, they're not going to call if they see a crime.
Gentlewoman Yield,
Certainly.
is that right?
Yes.
See, this is what I was saying in Irving, Texas. They would not ask that unless they intended to arrest them for a crime that was committed that was a local or a state crime that have nothing to do with a federal violation. If they violated the law in Texas, is how I believe that process works. Not that they will sit there and arrest somebody for a violation of immigration laws, but rather for the intended reason. They're not going around questioning people. Police officers don't have time for that.
If I may, I would
I
ask
asked the question, I think.
unanimous consent to place into the record the section of the immigration law that the bill seeks
Yes,
to
ma'am, if
make
I could,
mandatory.
but my question is, you were saying they're going around looking at people just like literally
Well,
picking
for
them off the street to ask about their immigration status.
let me just give you.
That is not anywhere near reality.
Let me give you a scenario, and this is why, I mean, I've heard from our local police as an example. You have a domestic violence call. It is very common in many jurisdictions. You show up, the officer on the scene doesn't know who did what, so they bring everybody in. They sort it out, not on the scene, but at the jail. Or the prosecutor decides who to prosecute, who not to. If you provide the immigration status of those individuals to ICE, what I've been told by police is before you know it, you're not going to get any calls on domestic violence cases because people are more afraid of being deported than they are of being beaten up by their
Gentlemen,
spouse.
allow me to engage the witness.
I'll further yield, yes.
Thank you very much. I'm really, I think, trying to learn more. My point is that if in Texas, as best I understand, if a person was not material or would not be charged as a result of whatever the occasion that they were brought in for, then there would be no reason to go seek out information about their nationality. In my understanding, not opinion. So all I'm saying is, but to go all the way and not do nothing is what we're talking about, not do what's reasonable. Thank you.
We have
So, I mean, I'm trying to again understand this. So, many law enforcement agencies have apparently decided that this trying to do what this is saying they have to do or lose funding is would make their communities less safe because they would have to divert time and effort to it. It might interfere with community policing, whatever.
that is their testimony, yes.
Now, on the other hand, you have executive actions like DACA and DAPA. It would seem like, and those have generally been supported by law enforcement, I think for the reason that they then help them focus their limited resources precisely on these criminal aliens that we're talking about here. Is that also, I mean, the more you can kind of rule out the non-criminals and whether it's provisional status or whatever, you narrow down the folks that you need the increased scrutiny on. Does that make sense?
That is the theory, and I think it would be less than candid to say that 100% of law enforcement officials in the United States agree on anything.
Right, of course.
But I'd say the weight of opinion is as you've described.
And that's what I've heard from my sheriffs and my police chiefs as well, and I think, of course, everybody doesn't agree. Now, Mr. Byrne brought up the powerful testimony of Ms. Steinley's father, and I was reviewing it while some of the other folks were speaking. And I would like to submit the Senate testimony to our record, Mr. Chair, if I will. It's just 2 pages long. In part, it says, "It's unbelievable to see that so many innocent Americans have been killed by undocumented immigrant felons in recent years. In fact, we recently came across a statistic that says between 2010 and 2014, 121 unique criminal aliens who had an active deportation case at the time of release were subsequently charged with a homicide-related offense." He continues, "Our family realizes the complexities of immigration laws. However, we feel strongly that some legislation should be discussed, enacted, and/or changed to take these undocumented immigrant felons off our street for good." And so, end quote. And so, unfortunately, Mr. Byrne, this piece of legislation doesn't take a single person off any street. In fact, it could, and it likely would, remove resources that our law enforcement agencies actually use to keep both criminal aliens as well as criminals who are not aliens off the street. So,
Will the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to yield.
I don't think the testimony I heard previously was that this legislation is designed to change existing substantive law. It's here to take funding away from sanctuary cities to change their behavior, because their behavior is they will not enforce the law. And until they enforce the law, that number 121 will go up. And we have a way to change their behavior by taking money. And taking money away from people does change their behavior. That's human nature.
Reclaim my time.
Thank
You did say one thing in your earlier statement that I didn't write down the exact words, but I strongly agree with. And I think what you said was along the lines of that this body deserves some of the blame. I would go further and say this body deserves the bulk share of the blame. When you talk to your local law enforcement officials, they are often doing the best they can with what they have. It's our failure to secure the border. That's our responsibility. That's not my Boulder County Sheriff's responsibility. It's not one of your police chiefs. It's our responsibility to make sure that there's not 10 million people here illegally, that there's an orderly way that this is sorted out. Given our failure, I have great respect for the men and women in our police agencies and our sheriff agencies who are simply doing the best they can in a system that has a chaos that we have imposed upon them. And what they're saying in this case is, here you are saying you're going to take away our funds if we don't go through these additional bureaucratic loopholes that we believe will result in a less safe community back home, because it interferes with this aspect of community policing, or because you're making our already overworked cops do this and that when they should be trying to take criminals off the street, both alien and American. And so that's why they're telling us it's not an answer. Again, this case and so many others call out for us to respond. But again, this is not a response that would have helped in this case or other cases like it. So I hope that we can get to the meat of the matter. We can get around even if we can't do a comprehensive bill, if we can encapsulate a transitional status of DACA or DAPA in statute for people that are law-abiding, that would be a terrific step forward that I think would have bipartisan support. If we can get border security, again, this fellow Lopez Sanchez had illegal entry. He shouldn't have been here. That's not San Francisco's fault. That's our fault. That's our fault. We haven't secured the border. So that's what we need to do, rather than try to check some box and say somehow we're threatening to withhold some funds from some cities that don't do something that their own sheriffs think will decrease the safety of their public. I mean, we're just joking with ourselves. So I hope, and I'd be happy to go to Ms. Lofgren, but I hope we can actually deal with substantive bills that can address this issue. Ms. Lofgren.
I just want to clarify in terms of this individual who's been charged with murder. He actually was caught by the Border Patrol over and over again. In fact, he was caught by the Border Patrol, removed in 94, and he came back. Then he was convicted. He was removed again in 97. He spent like 16 years in prison for being prosecuted for reentry after removal. It wasn't as if he was wandering around the United States. He was caught at the border by the Border Patrol. This is a guy who just wouldn't give up.
And to be clear, he was not allowed to legally enter the United States.
No, they caught him.
Right.
Like they're supposed to.
So, look, so there's a lot of issues that need to be fixed, but they are our underlying laws and our underlying system. Threatening police chiefs and sheriffs to run their agency this way or that way when it is our fault that they are dealing with this issue that they have is not a constructive way to get people like Lopez Sanchez and others off the streets before they commit murder.
Would the
should be
gentleman
our
yield?
goal here. I'll be happy to yield to the
It
gentleman
is
from
not
Virginia.
our fault that the city of San Francisco first passed a law prohibiting their law enforcement officers from communicating with ICE. I'm glad to see they're reconsidering that. And it is not our fault that the city of San Francisco released this individual onto the streets of San Francisco. And that is the narrow, targeted objective of this bill. And all the law says is, doesn't tell them what they have to do. It just says they can't pass a statute that says that the law enforcement officers can't communicate with ICE. Exactly what San Francisco is reviewing right now. And I would say they're reviewing it because of this terrible tragedy. And we're reviewing it because of this terrible tragedy as well. And yes, we need to do a whole lot more about enforcement of the law because there's strong evidence, we can discuss that at another hearing, strong evidence that this administration is not enforcing our current immigration laws, but there's also strong evidence that we do need to make changes in the law, and we should do it. I'm agreeing with that, but this is a good first step.
Mr. Goodlatte, I mean, you mentioned that the administration's not enforcing our current immigration law. Do you believe that our current immigration law is enforceable in its current form by any administration?
I certainly do, absolutely. Do I think it needs to be amended and improved? Absolutely.
How would we I mean, we as a Congress haven't even come close to appropriating resources to enforce.
We have appropriated resources for 34,000 beds, and this administration has never come close to using those to detain people for deportation.
With respect, I believe that the number of people here illegally is in the 10 to 14 million range. And you're quibbling over whether there's 20,000 beds or 30,000 beds that are full. I would not call that an enforcement of our law.
If you fully enforce the law, you will make substantial progress. Do you need to do more? Absolutely.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'll be happy to yield.
Well, what did they do? This president has, would you agree, deported more people than any president?
I would not agree with that. That is a false assertion, and the reason is that this administration began a process of counting people detained at the border and released back into another country. And the previous administrations did not count that. And if you look at the number, 2/3 of the people they count fit into that category. If you look at the pure numbers of people arrested and deported from the interior of the United States, the numbers are down 70% in this administration.
Well, and reclaiming my time, I think that most folks who look at our immigration law and would agree that it cannot be enforced as currently written. Certainly, President Bush failed to enforce it. President Clinton failed to enforce it. And it's not because they didn't try, and even if you feel it's because President Obama didn't try, which I disagree with, I certainly think that all of our recent presidents have tried their best. It is simply unenforceable, which is why we need, in this body, need to address it. We should not blame our various cities and counties that are doing the best they can with terrible choices they have to make with the limited law enforcement resources they have. And if San Francisco hopefully will address, the issues as they should within their jurisdiction. But when you have a jurisdiction that because of our failure, 10 or 20% of the people living in that jurisdiction might not have documentation, they're the ones who have to deal with it on the ground, not us. It's our fault. They have to deal with it. And threatening and, in fact, removing funding from law enforcement, which is the very funding that keeps the streets safe, is likely to lead to more murders like the one that tragically occurred in San Francisco. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman.
Someone seek
I seek
time?
recognition.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Look, I'll have more to say about this tomorrow, and we'll continue this process. But also, in regard to putting testimony into the record, I do want to also insert into the record the four other families of murder victims that were murdered by illegal immigrants from yesterday's Senate hearing. Not just focus on one individual, but there were four other testimonies there, and I just want to have that inserted in the record.
I appreciate it. Without objection, we'll enter that. I am well aware, you are too, that the gentleman, Mr. Poulos, who's a member of this committee, has consistently followed a process which I appreciate and respect, but I appreciate today his verbiage and words that, in fact, we do need, Mr. Chairman, I believe legislation to come to the Rules Committee. You and I have talked about it numerous times, maybe not more than 400 or 500, but probably 400 or 500 times, about a desire and a need for this body to further debate the issue and to come to some consensus. You and I have talked about that. What I would say is, I believe, and I believe at the time I scheduled this hearing, and I believe it is, including our leadership, very appropriate to debate the issue that presented itself in particular in San Francisco. I would like to, in fairness, say I'm delighted that San Francisco has agreed to reevaluate their position. I believe all cities, and I would encourage, including the city of Dallas, Texas, Mike Rollins, and our sheriff, Lupe Valdez, who's a friend of mine, I would encourage them to reevaluate, and I think all cities should look at what they are doing in light of the things that have happened. By the way, we're doing these same things as it relates to recruiters for our military. They need to reevaluate now that things have happened. I think that there are calls to do that, and I encourage people to do that.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Just a quick yes or no answer. Given the fact that we have had no hearings, no markup, no nothing on this bill, would my colleagues be in favor of an open rule so that members who are seeing this for the first time have an opportunity to be able to offer their own ideas on what we might do?
Well, certainly, the gentleman, the young chairman of the Judiciary Committee, knows that we did not ask him how to present this bill today, and he probably would offer the same advice to us. He would defer, but I will let the gentleman answer that.
Well, first of all, let me second the chairman's position that, as we have discussed many times, other bills, 5 of which have been passed out already of the Homeland Security Committee and the Judiciary Committee, come to the floor that would address a multitude of different things. The answer is this is a targeted approach, and I always respect the jurisdiction of the Rules Committee to set what they think is appropriate, but this is narrow and targeted. We should follow through and bring broader, more appropriate measures in terms of addressing wider things that some members would like to have.
Why am I not surprised? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentleman did answer the question, and the record should reflect that the gentleman did have an opinion about the question. Thank you very much. I want to thank both of you for taking time to be here today. Nobody thinks this is an easy way to make a living, and you have proved today that it can be done gracefully. And I want to thank both of you for your professional atmosphere that you have created and help us create in this committee today to talk about difficult issues in such a way. And I would also like to say the same thing about the gentleman from Colorado and all of my colleagues that are on the committee today, and I want to thank you very much. If you'll please make sure that our witnesses leave anything they have in writing for our awesome stenographer, we appreciate it. Before we end this hearing today, I want to acknowledge Dr. Jeff Smith, who is a friend of mine, who is an orthopedic surgeon, who is visiting my office. Dr. Smith, I want to thank you for taking time. You are certainly a man of medicine, but today you chose to come to the Rules Committee, and Dr. Smith, I want to thank you for taking time to do that also. Is there anyone else that seeks to be heard as a witness on H.R. 3009? Seeing none, this now closes the hearing portion of H.R. 3009, and the chairman will be in receipt of a motion from the gentlewoman from Grandfather Community, North Carolina.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 3009, the Enforce the Law for Sanctuary Cities Act, closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour debate equally divided and controlled by the chair, ranking minority member of the Committee on Judiciary. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. Finally, the rule provides 1 motion to recommit.
You've now heard the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Does the gentleman, Mr. Collins, seek recognition?
Yes,
Gentleman's
Mr. Chairman.
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I think enforce this rule provides consideration of H.R. 3009 under a closed amendment process. None of the amendments that were submitted, and there were some, were germane to the bill. This rule provides for swift consideration of the bill, and I think deserves support out of this committee. That I yield back.
Thank you very much. Is there, now that we've...
Yes,
now
I
that,
yield to Mr. McGovern.
now that we have heard the testimony and the motion, is there amendment or discussion? Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee grant H.R. 3009 an open rule so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bill on the floor. And let me just say that I don't expect this to pass, but this process is an absolute outrage. And I don't know how anybody can defend it. No hearings, no markups. we have all this opposition from local law enforcement, and we're just steamrolling ahead, and no evidence that this is going to do anything to help anything. And I think at a minimum, given the way this process has been so closed and exclusive to a few people who put this together, obviously without the help of the minority or input from law enforcement, I mean, I think the least we can do is open this process up and allow members of both parties to be able to offer their amendments. So I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this.
I would advise the gentleman that he'll probably get a motion to recommit with this, and I'm sure you will find a very targeted approach that will specifically answer the question directly related to the murder that occurred in San Francisco and will help advise us on wise and prudent policies.
With all due respect, Mr. Chairman, that is not the same thing as an open.
Hold on just a second. And that we further believe that there were no amendments that were germane that were put in order, and so we will look forward to seeing in a motion to recommit that specific targeted answer that the gentleman would choose to make. Is there further?
Yeah, I guess what I would just say,
Gentleman's
Mr.
recognized.
Chairman, is that maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I kind of would like to see this place work for a change, where committees of jurisdiction actually hold hearings and listen to people outside of the bubble of the Beltway here, and outside of pollsters and pundits, and actually do something that's good for the country. And, you know, we have a bill here that there's no indication would have done anything to prevent this tragedy, yet we all recognize this is a tragedy, we should do something. And no hearings, nothing. No Democrats or Republicans on the committee of jurisdiction had anything to do with putting this bill together. And I just think this is outrageous, and I think we would not be doing our job, and I think without objecting to this. And it would be nice to hear some people on your side object to this process as well, too, because this is not the way this place should be run. And I yield back my time and ask for a...
Yes, sir. Further discussion. Gentleman, Florida Judge.
Mr. Chairman, you know, Ms. Slaughter raised the issue about other matters. The 5 Marines that were killed, we didn't do a rocket docket on legislation dealing with the subject that you raised, that I agree, that we need to do something with our recruiting centers and with protection of the military particularly. But yesterday in my community, 4 people were killed last night with guns. And until we recognize guns and the epidemic, we aren't busying ourselves dealing with them. I take from this hearing that y'all don't like San Francisco. And I take from this hearing, obviously, y'all don't like President Obama's exercises with reference to immigration. And I also take from this hearing a lack of courage to place immigration reform before the American people. It's sort of like, you know, you don't like San Francisco, like I've told you I don't like your state, you know, and that's about how it goes.
Well, the gentleman can feel the way he chooses, but in fact, I have never expressed any heartburn or problem with San Francisco at all, and I do not harbor those. Judge Hastings, I do not harbor those feelings about anywhere in Florida, nor do I harbor that about places in San Francisco. I think San Francisco is a beautiful city. My sister lived there for 17 years. So I would like the gentleman please to know that I disagree with his assertion that I would feel that way, because in fact I don't. Further discussion. The vote will now be on the amendment that's on the floor from the gentleman from Massachusetts. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No.
I ask for a roll call.
Gentleman asks for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox? No. Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Cole? Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Burgess? No. Mr. Burgess? No. Mr. Stivers? No. Mr. Stivers? No. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins? No. Mr. Byrne? No. Mr. Byrne? No. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse? No. Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis?
Aye.
Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment's not agreed to, not agreed to. Further amendment, the gentleman from Colorado, the gentleman, Mr. Polis, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment to the rule. I move to amend the resolution to provide for consideration of a comprehensive immigration reform bill if offered by Leader Pelosi or her designee under the rule.
Further discussion?
I would just add that I'm a big fan of the state of Texas, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I have been a big fan of yours for a long time and of Colorado. I would, in discussion, would say that I don't know that that solves the problem that we were accused of not solving either.
No, it
But
doesn't.
it gets closer, and so I think that's a red herring to think that that would be the subject of the debate today. Further discussion? Those in favor, will now vote on the amendment from the gentleman from Colorado. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Noes have it. No.
Roll call vote, Mr.
Someone
Chair.
ask for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox? No. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Cole? Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Stivers? No. Mr. Stivers, no. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins, no. Mr. Byrne? No. Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse, no. Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr.
Clerk
Chairman,
report the
no.
total.
3 yeas.
Amendment's not agreed
nay.
to.
8
Amendment's
nay.
not agreed to. Further amendments or discussion? Okay, the vote now be on the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. And those, no?
No.
Ayes have it, the ayes have it. The motion, gentlewoman asks for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox? Aye. Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Cole? Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess? Aye. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Stivers? Mr. Stivers, aye. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins, aye. Mr. Byrne? Aye. Mr. Byrne, aye. Mr. Newhouse? Aye. Mr. Newhouse, aye. Ms. Slaughter? No. Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern?
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Polis? No. Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman,
Clerk
aye.
report the total.
8 yeas, 3 nays.
The motion is agreed to, and the gentleman, Mr. Collins from Georgia, will be handling this for Republicans. Mr. Polis for Democrats. We do not expect any further business from the committee. I would yield to the gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to note that I have two guests today, Ms. Anna Hardage, who's here shadowing me today, and Abby Hamrick, who's been an intern in my office all summer and is the vice president of the Student Government Association at Appalachian State University and has done a great job. Thank you very much.
Congratulations were provided. Both of you are here. This ends the committee hearing for the week.